Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Firstly, it's an honor to share some thoughts with you guys this evening. It's an even bigger honor to share the evening that Onkar Singh just mentioned, that Bhai Nirmal Singh used to do the evening talks, who was affectionately known as Colonel. And I think Bhai Nirmal Singh is indicative of this camp. And also a big congratulations to the Sevadars and the campers for 20 years of this camp. 20 years is no mean feat really. And the Sevadars that you've interacted with, whether they're in your groups, you've had your chit chats with them, or they're the Sevadars who you haven't seen, you don't know their names, but they're working tirelessly. They were actually campers like you. And what this camp has done, we talk about awakening, and you've been discussing awakening. This camp is actually awakened a lot of souls. The hope is that what this camp does is continue that lineage, that the campers that we see before us, in the coming years, take the reins and become the Sevadars of this camp. You've discussed in some detail, I've been told, elements of awakening, and a lot of those awakening come in the forms of meditation, connecting with Waheguru, having a relationship with Guru Maharaj. That awakening also then entails serving humanity, and I think you guys have discussed this, and Ravi, I was told, was here this morning and discussed those concepts of serving humanity. But an element of awakening, as you guys have discussed today briefly, awakening often results in forsaking, Tyagana. And the word forsaking can be seen quite negative, to abandon, to leave behind. But I think what a lot of us are guilty of, myself included, and I think 90% of the Qawm, we're all guilty of underestimating the era that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was prakashing, the real awakening. We see Guru Nanak Dev Ji as an elderly, white, fluffy bearded gentleman who roamed the Indian subcontinent, and some people even went as far as Rome, and preached love, peace and humanity. He essentially came on this earth, was Prakash, and gave some new ideas. But I think we gravely underestimate the era that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was Prakashing. Guru Nanak Dev Ji themselves write quite vividly in their own compositions the plight of the ordinary man, especially the Hindu, under Islamic law, under Islamic rule. Guru Nanak Dev Ji was Prakash in an era of Babur. We often talk about Babur as one of the most evil rulers the world had ever seen. We say Guru Nanak Dev Ji had the courage to call Babur Jabbar. But who was Babur? Babur was a descendant of Genghis Khan, one of the craziest conquerors the world has ever seen. Wave after wave of Islamic jihad. If the world thinks they know Islamic jihad, take a look at our history. Wave after wave of Islamic jihad couldn't conquer the Indian subcontinent until Babur took the reins. Babur established the first Mughal rule in the Indian subcontinent. The first Mughal rule, so this is no small fish. And what Babur did was, instead of rule through love and affection, he ruled through the sword of intimidation, oppression and violence. His rule was full of demolition of Hindu temples, forced conversions, rape and murder. And anyone who survived was enslaved. So Hindus across the Indian subcontinent, this is where we really need to get to grips with what kind of era this was. The whole subcontinent was gripped by the fact that if you're not a Muslim, you must be treated differently. You must pay a higher tax. You must not have access to what the Muslims have access to. And this simply became the way of life. People didn't know too different. But what Guru Nanak Dev Ji also did was, in their compositions, again really vividly, was critical of Hindu elitism. So it was quite simple. If you're not a Muslim, you're treated differently. And in society, what was ravaged was injustice and inequality. If you belonged to a lower caste, you couldn't even be touched. You couldn't participate in society. And if you're a woman, forget about it. What Guru Nanak Dev Ji did was they sacrificed everything that was ingrained in society. Absolutely everything. They didn't come onto this earth to meditate under a tree. Guru Nanak Dev Ji didn't come onto this earth and become Prakash to start just another religion to make up the numbers. They came on this earth to give the world a system that it had never seen before, ever. But it could be argued that if Guru Nanak Dev Ji is preaching and establishing this system of love and equality for all of mankind, why wouldn't the Muslims embrace it? Why wouldn't the Hindus embrace it? Because what Guru Nanak Dev Ji's system did, it eroded and completely destroyed the concept of the kafir, the infidel, the non-Muslim that must be treated differently. When Guru Nanak Dev Ji got the peasants and the untouchables alike, along with the emperors, and made them sit down and eat langar, it destroyed the Hindu principle of higher and lower. So this system had to come at a price. And just to give it some context, you could say that the Indian subcontinent even today regards women as subordinates, as people who are inferior. If we look to Europe, Europe is seen as the bastion of liberty and freedom. Even the texts of the Romans, the biblical texts, the Greeks, they all talk about how women were subordinate, how they were inferior and must obey their men, whether as wives, daughters or sisters. Even during the European Renaissance in the 17th century, this is when they thought Europe had come into a new modern era, but it left women behind. This was in the 17th century. Guru Nanak Dev Ji had already come onto the Indian subcontinent, which was ravaged by these concepts of inequality, and preached to the world that everybody is equal. And everyone starts flocking to Sikhi. And what Baba realizes, and so do the Hindu elites, that if this continues, then our power will be eroded. And it's at this point, not in 1984, at this point, that the oppression of Sikhs starts. Because Guru Nanak Dev Ji was imprisoned for these beliefs. That was the sacrifice that Guru Nanak Dev Ji had made to give the world this system. So what we have on our hands in Guru Nanak Dev Ji is not just a fluffy, white-bearded man who preached peace, equality and love. This was the King of Kings. The King of Kings, the greatest agitator and revolutionary the world has ever seen. But did this stop at Guru Nanak Dev Ji? Did this awakening, did this new system stop at Guru Nanak Dev Ji? Even if we go down the line and look at Guru Arjan Dev Ji, we call them Shaheedis de Sartaj. We talk about forsaking. Guru Arjan Dev Ji is known for sitting on that blistering hot tavi and refusing to accept Islam. By Guru Arjan Dev Ji's time, by Guru Arjan Dev Ji's succession as the King of Kings, Sikhi had experienced unimaginable growth. And by Guru Arjan Dev Ji, there was a consolidation of the principles that we are political as well as spiritual. Guru Arjan Dev Ji actually talks in their own compositions about something called Halim Miraj, a rule with humility. Guru Arjan Dev Ji actually gives in their own compositions, and the world can tell us as much as they want that all the Gurus did was sit under trees and preach peace. Guru Arjan Dev Ji in their own compositions talk about Halim Miraj, a system of governance where you govern mankind through harmony and humility. What Guru Arjan Dev Ji realized, what Guru Arjan Dev Ji knew, the fifth Nanak, was that we've talked a lot about this new system. We've talked a lot about humanity, but let's put the metal to the test. How valid is Guru Nanak Dev Ji's revolution? Can it stand unbearable torture? So Guru Arjan Dev Ji not only sat on the Tati Tawi because they wanted to give us a way of living, which is why we give these shabeels on Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shahidi. We give these shabeels because the drinks are cold and they're sweet, and they signify how cold and cool Guru Arjan Dev Ji was on that blistering tabi. They represent how sweet Guru Arjan Dev Ji recognized the hukum of Waheguru. Guru Arjan Dev Ji also gave that Shahidi to show the world that we're not just all talk. They defied Jahangir in the same way that Guru Nanak Dev Ji defied Babur. And forgive me for skipping some of the gurus, but I'm just picking on some of the gurus because each individual guru, if we do our research, each individual guru represented a different revolution in their own kind, in their own way. Guru Hargobind Sahib, what they learned from Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shahidi was that yes, we accept Waheguru's will, but if we are subordinates of an evil ruler, then Sikhi will diminish. So they do something quite remarkable, and this is going to be at the heart of the discussion. They erect the Akal Takht, or Waheguru's Takht. And it's not an Akal Takht as we know it today. We go to Harmandir Sahib and we do a Matha Tek and we look over and we see Sri Akal Takht Sahib and it's beautiful, it's full of gold and marble. But that's not what it looked like when Guru Hargobind Sahib erected it. It was a 12-foot block of stone. No beauty, no gold, no marble, but it's what it stood for. Guru Hargobind Sahib said and declared to the whole world that when all the evil rulers in the world trample on your rights, come to Waheguru's Takht and we'll give you justice. And this is at the heart of where we are today. Guru Tegh Bahadur Maharaj, it's said that it's easy to have honor when your principles aren't being tested. Easy to have honor when your principles aren't being tested. Guru Tegh Bahadur Maharaj gave an epic show of what Sikhi was all about. They sat on the cobbled streets of Delhi and had their head hacked off for a group that they didn't actually agree with. They could have been anyone. We weren't there just to protect Hindus. They could have been anyone. The point was Hale Miraj. Let's lay another foundation on Hale Miraj. But did this forsaking stop at the Guru Sahibs? Even after Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj sent their own sons in a show of courage and bravery unmatched in the annals of world history, did the forsaking stop? Did the awakening somehow diminish with the passing of the Gurus? What actually ensued was unbearable torture to test our validity and strength. And none more so than the great general Baba Banda Singh Bahadur. A perfect example of someone who sacrificed and forsook everything that was wrong. He was a man who was great at mysticism, great at magic, at witchcraft. But when he had the darshan of the King of Kings, Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, he forsook everything he knew and embraced something else, something way more beautiful than he could ever imagine. Now, Banda Singh Bahadur is no small figure in our history. Banda Singh Bahadur was dispatched by the very hand of Guru Gobind Singh Ji himself with full authority to go and get vengeance for Islamic persecution. But while you're at it, you're going to establish Khalsa Raj with full authority of Guru Gobind Singh's hand. You don't get any bigger than that. Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, with only a few men, without ego, without hate, without fear, but a burning desire to keep this ideology alive that was started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji, set about on his mission. Baba Banda Singh Bahadur eventually abolished the feudal system. He abolished systems that were there for ages, for all ages, gave power back to the peasants and took it from the landlords, minted a coin in Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji's name, and started Khalsa Raj. But the climax of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur's life is something to be seen, something to behold, something about true awakening. Because for Banda Singh Bahadur, once he laid eyes on Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, there was no element of sacrifice. When eventually the Mughals did the utmost and thought this Banda Singh Bahadur is a thorn, he's an absolute thorn, and if we're not careful, he'll take the whole subcontinent and beyond. When Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, after extreme torture and searching the swamplands and the wilderness of Punjab, eventually gets caught with 700 of his stalwarts, there were two members of the East India Company that were present, two white guys from the East India Company present. These 700 Sikh, sons of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj and the stalwarts of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, they were given a choice. It was a simple choice. It was the kind of choice that Guru Arjan Dev Ji had, Islam or the Tawheed. These 700 Sikh were all asked to forego and forsake this thing you call Sikhi, forsake being the sons of Guru Nanak, and embrace Islam. We will make you rich beyond your wildest imagination. Each day, for a whole week, each day, 100 Sikh were executed. Each head bowed, not towards Islam, but to the executioner. Each day 100 Sikh heads rolled. Each was cut in two. And that gory scene was enacted for 7 full days, while the great general was in a cage. And according to records, the bodies were taken into the jungles for the vultures to eat, and the heads were put on spikes and poles in the marketplace as a warning to all the other rebels of Guru Nanak Dev Ji that this is your fate. Not one from those 700, not one from those 700 flinched. And then they turned to the great general himself. The fearless warrior was put in a cage and hoisted on an elephant. He was dressed in mock attire of an emperor, with a red rag put on his head. And his 4-year-old son, Ajay Singh, was put in his lap, hoisted in this cage, and sent through Delhi, while being mocked by everyone. John Sermon and Edward Stevenson, these were the 2 members of the East India Company that were present. And they write in their records that never before in their life have they seen someone who's been stripped of absolutely everything. This is Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj's deputy we're talking about. Never have they seen somebody stripped of absolutely everything. But they said if there was one thing they couldn't remove, if there's one thing they couldn't change, if there's one thing they couldn't cut out, that was his dignity. And so came the turn of Baba Deep Singh Bahadur. And many of us know how his life ended. Liver cut out, kidneys taken out, eyes gouged out. Even the heart of his son Ajay Singh thrust into his heart. Something the world has never seen. And only a few months ago, 300 years of that Shaheedi came. 300 years. And it came and went without even a whisper. When we start forgetting a Shaheedi of that magnitude, we're going to start to have problems. If Sikhi was about closing your eyes to the world and sitting under a tree and just jumping down, none of this needed to happen. None of it. This man laid absolutely everything on the line but his values. But what allowed such a superhuman feat? What allowed such a superhuman feat? It was this desire to keep the ideology alive. To keep the ideology alive. To keep that awakening from Guru Nanak Dev Ji alive. So even after weathering Islamic oppression after Islamic oppression and storm after storm, the falling of a Sikh leader gave rise to another. So committed and potent was this ideology in their hearts that even when a leader of Baba Deep Singh Bahadur's magnitude fell, it took less than 40 years for someone like Baba Deep Singh to rise. Less than 40 years. Because even in the swamplands and the jungles and the wilderness of Punjab, the Khalsa still fought for their sovereignty. Not because they were power hungry like any other conventional power or emperor. It was the ability to go into battle and be nirvair. We talk about Paikanaya, giving water to the enemies of the Khalsa, that's nirvair. But we can also, we're the only people in the world that can have power and be nirvair. But what we steadily saw was a loss of that empire. And with that loss of empire came a real shift in who we are today. To understand the depths of our problems, even today, we need to delve slightly deep. Because people like Indira Gandhi, Badal, KPS Gill, General Dyer, these are just symptoms. They're just symptoms. The real illness is something else. What the Mughals realized, and so did the British pretty quickly, was that even if you put them on a charkra, they won't wield. Even if, like by Mani Singh, you chop them from limb to limb, they don't give in. And at the British learned, even when you tie them to cannons and blast them to smithereens, nothing much changes. So the British spent years to take this relationship that we have with this ideology, to take this relationship that we have with Gurbani and break it. And this is what India learned. India learned from our history that whether it was against the Mughals or the British, physical torture and unimaginable terror does not intimidate or does not control the Sikh. So what the Indian establishment decided to do is to build on what the British were doing for 100 years, is to break this relationship. What India eventually began to do was to say, create a Sikh that said, you can do as much part as you want, but do it in your own house. We'll even give you a Gurkha Sahib. We'll even build you a Gurugar, but in your own personal time, in your own house. But when it comes to governance and guidance, it is the Indian nation state that reigns supreme. Many tried, and the Indian establishment were the only ones that became successful. They got into our psyche that Gurbani was our part-time, and we must be loyal to the Indian nation state. Until something truly remarkable happened. In the era that we live in today, something truly remarkable happened. Along came a general the caliber of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, almost 250 years later, in the form of Sant Janel Singh Khalsa Pendrawale. We often have these detailed discussions about our history and Santji and where he fits in, giving rise to economic injustice, political inequality. But in essence, what Santji had truly done at its core was just ask you, who are you loyal to? What Santji eventually did, and it's no mean feat, considering India is the third largest country in the world and probably holds the biggest army, what Santji did was take the fear out of the nation state and pledge our allegiance back to Gurbani. So potent was Santji's prachar that even a decade after their Shaheedi, real-life Robin Hoods like Sukh Khan Jinnah produced dazzling displays of bringing justice back to the Khalsa. Santji led a similar uprising to the same as Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, and it could even be argued that it was even a bit greater, because Santji lived in a time where he could have been the celebrity Baba that we see today. The Baba that has a massive dera, the Baba that has an Audi traveling from place to place, has a huge following, talks about Gurbani but never defends. Santji was the leader of the Damdami Taksal, a Taksal started by Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj themselves. Next year, Sant Pendrawale would have been 70 years old. He would have been worshipped. But he forsook. He sacrificed. Because where people thought that it was, in Punjabi they say, a takka, they felt like there was a takka, we just been treated a bit differently. What Santji saw was the diminishing of a Qaum, the annihilation of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's revolution. But in its aftermath, rather than being inspired by Santji and the real-life Robin Hoods like Jagraj Singh Tufan and Baba Manoja, you see their photos here, history started to taunt us. They say history exists behind us, and to find it you need to look back. But history also finds its way, weaving its way into our future. History can teach us, especially ours, how to be roaring lions, but history can also haunt us. And rather than being energized, uplifted, and infused with that spirit of one man standing in Sri Akal Takht Sahib against 12 Vijayanta battle tanks, starving, outmatched, outnumbered, 12 tanks. We're talking about a tank that could find a target 3 miles away, weighing over a ton. 12 tanks are parked at the Parkarma, and Santji does not flinch. Rather than taking inspiration from such an amazing story, what we have done ourselves and what the world has done to us is get us to focus on the trauma of 1984. What we lost, how many lives perished, how many houses that were burnt down, Darbar Sahib in ruins. When those lives were taken in Operation Blue Star, that was a genocide. But what Santaji and the 150 men did was the Battle of the Akal Takht. They willingly entered that battle. And we are beginning to only focus on the trauma of 1984. And the question we must ask ourselves is that if the missiles under Sardar Kapoor Singh and Jassa Singh Ahluwalia, if they only focused on the trauma of those 700 Sikh that were dispatched, cut in two over the course of a week, we wouldn't have the glorious history that we have today. Yes, those 700 Sikh, including Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, were someone's son, someone's brother, and someone's dad. But what those 700 were, they were celebrated. What Santaji showed us, in essence, was that we don't need to look back 250, 300 years to find our heroes. We don't need to look back 200 years and flip pages of history to find a superhero. They exist in our time, they exist in our era. But by focusing just on the trauma of 1984, by allowing history to haunt us, we are beginning to forsake ourselves. We're beginning to forsake all the wrong things. And one of the biggest things we're forsaking, and something that will really bite us if we don't stem it, is the current reality that's happening. We are forsaking our honor. What these people are realizing is that you don't need to kill every Sikh to finish Sikhi. What you must do is kill their values. And when you kill those values, you replace them with new ones. Then you may have the Hindu stroke Sikh that the world is waiting to see. This level of forsaking has allowed us to forsake great things. Yesterday, our brother Deepa talked about some endemic problems in our society that we are turning our backs to. Not only are we forsaking the honor of Gurbani because we're very comfy in our lives, really busy trying to get degrees and Mercedes, we're also forsaking the honor of our girls. Our Katha will give great stories of Mir Manus jail. They will say that our Bibiyan were in Mir Manus jail, but not one of them accepted Islam. Not one of them. They had their kids cut into pieces, and in defense of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's ideology, they had them wrapped around their neck. But not one faltered. But Mir Manus jails still exist today. They exist in derelict flats in Birmingham, in Telford, in London, in Derby. And because we are so comfortable in our lives, we're willing for that to happen. We're forsaking honor of our Guru Maharaj. So in essence, this raging lion that was raging through 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, this raging lion called Sikhi has been tamed to some extent. And it's not been tamed by any government. It's been tamed by us. And the reason why the Indian establishment isn't going full throttle on us is because essentially there's nothing to go full throttle on. We're no longer seen as a credible threat. We're no longer seen as the bastions of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's revolution. I mean, we're constantly in the news for heroic acts, feeding the homeless, feeding refugees, We will have detailed conversations about the coordinated attacks in Paris. But try having a conversation about the coordinated attacks on Gurbani in November 2015, and all of a sudden terrorism has come back. So unless we have this confidence back into ourselves and infuse ourselves with this spirit, we are laying down a really fragile future for a future generation Sikh. Really fragile future. But if we are forsaking honor, our daughters, our sisters, what are we embracing in its place? What's taken place of that stuff that we've forsaken? We've forsaken the truth. We are now, the world was trying to interpret our identity. The world was trying to tell us who we are, and now we're joining in. We are telling ourselves, and even our children, that Sikhi is about meditation alone and political avoidance. We are embracing infighting. We are embracing arguments about calendar dates. We are embracing arguments about whether you should have langar on tables or on the floor, on chairs or on the floor. And so, we are joining in this process, and Sikh is slowly and subtly transforming before our very eyes. Because it seems that even if you look at us here in the UK, our values are always up for debate. Turn on the BBC Asia network and they would want to know, why is a Muslim boy not allowed to marry a Sikh girl in a Gurdwara? Always up for debate. And our level of compromise has allowed this. Our level of complicity, our quietness, our compliance has allowed this debate. Muslim women can't even go into a mosque, but that's not even up for debate. How about that for a debate? But this isn't to say that we don't forsake. And I don't want people to sit here to think that suddenly are we the worst generation in Sikh history. Because we do forsake. Our parents, they sacrificed. They left everything they knew and came to an alien land and settled. They sacrificed their earnings so we could go to college and university. You yourself will start sacrificing for your children. You will go without so they can have. You will save for their education. There's nothing bad in that. But so the cycle continues. But the question we must ask ourselves is this: what are we forsaking when it comes to that revolution? Have we done anything for those things that brought us to this point here? And forsaking may not be being chopped limb from limb. Forsaking may not be having your head severed. Forsaking may not even be facing 12 Vijayanta battle tanks. But there's many ways to forsake in this world, and there's many ways that we can make a difference. And it may not be glorious, but future generations will look towards this one as the gap between the 84 revolution, something that reawakened Guru Nanak Dev Ji's system, and what we will eventually become. This camp should be replicated everywhere. If we are to give our kids and the next generation of Sikh a fighting chance, we must replicate this camp in our homes. We must tell our kids that it's not just Spider-Man that has superpowers. Garja Singh and Bodha Singh stood alone and taxed the Mughals. We must forsake this notion that money solves everything. We must forsake this notion that we must keep building buildings, that we must extend our Gurukha so we can accommodate more weddings. And what we must do, and this will fall on all of us is to use that to develop some character. Develop the next generation. Develop the next Sukha Mehtab. And at the very least, if we are going to be the bearers of Hale Miraj, and I pray to God one day that we stand as free people, if we are going to be the bearers of Hale Miraj, then at the very least, we must protect our centers of gravity. We must restore. Our centers of gravity are the things that keep us going. Gurbani, our everlasting Guru, and the land of Punjab. We must put an end to this beatitude, and we must try and save Punjab. Because if Punjab falls, and some of you even may have seen the Channel 4 documentary, even they are talking about how Punjab is falling. We can help a farmer. We can help. We all say we know a smacky in our pen. We can help someone come off drugs. We can build some rehabilitation. Some of you are pharmacists, some of you are doctors, some of you are counsellors. And in trying to win these little battles, in saving one drug addict in Punjab, in saving one drug addict here, who knows? Who knows what kind of confidence that would give us? And so if we stop, because we have somehow stopped sacrificing, and if this continues, we will be those Hindus that occasionally masquerade as Sikh, occasionally masquerade as Sikh. And then we really will be sacrificing. In fact, we won't be sacrificing. That would be a tragedy. That would be the greatest tragedy the world has ever seen. To have a beautiful light that was created by Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, that has been infused with the blood of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, Guru Tegh Bahadur Maharaj, with Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj's own sons. That would be a tragedy. And if nothing else, we should take heart from the fact that we have lived in the era of the greatest general for 250 years. And it must be now upon us to create a generation that will maneuver in ways that the world hasn't seen, especially India. Because in a hurried attempt to avoid prosecution in 1984, and the reason why 1984 is so pivotal is because if that doesn't make sense to our kids, none of our history will. If we can't place Santaji in the same lineage as Baba Deep Singh and Banda Singh Bahadur, then somehow this train will get derailed. So we need to create a generation that will maneuver. You can't even get books on 1984 anymore. Because even in the Indian establishment will say, you can talk about Banda Singh Bahadur until you're blue in the face. We'll give you pictures of Baba Deep Singh, put them up on your walls. You can talk about Bhagat Singh, Udham Singh and Kartar Singh Sarabha. But don't you dare mention Baba Manachal. Don't you dare talk about Sukhan Jindal, because now we're your oppressors. And these books aren't being printed, and the next generation aren't going to read. So we must tell the story. Some of it's been told on social media, it's having an impact, but it's not enough. What you'll find in our history and talking to people here is that our history shows terrible examples of trying to destroy us through violence, intimidation and oppression. But what our history will also show us, what our history also shows us, is that so long as one Sikh is alive, in the form of Garja Singh or Bota Singh, so long as one Sikh is still alive, who cares and has access to memory, Sikhi will survive. But the path is a long and arduous one. And the quest to establish another Khalsa Raj, the quest to establish Halimi Raj, where Khalsa will reign and nobody will be suppressed, and eventually create Begumpura, a land without sorrow. Those of you who are sat here today with the blood of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj running through your veins will realize that the quest has only just begun. May the King of Kings bless you, bless me, so that when we truly come to the altar of sacrifice, that we forsake for the right reasons. Residing just a short distance from us, in Sachkhand, just a short distance from where we are now, is a divine spirit that even Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj bowed to. If this divine spirit is presiding over us, then we cannot be controlled and we cannot be intimidated. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.